Take your papers and leave this bank.
You never even checked them.
I said leave, now.
My son will hear about this.
Why did you alter my mother's record? You have no idea what happened.
We traced every stolen dollar.
Now explain it under oath.
This bank failed you, Mrs. Holloway.
I knew exactly why I came. Mom, the scholarship carries your name.
Then give someone their first chance.
The teller didn't look up. The branch president had already turned away. The woman standing at the counter in the faded jacket, the worn canvas bag, had been told to wait 3 times already. No one checked the check she'd placed on the counter. No one asked her name. They glanced at her shoes and decided everything else. What no one inside First National Heritage Bank understood that Tuesday morning was that the man they had spent 4 months begging to meet was sitting 2 blocks away, waiting for her to call. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It had started the way most things in Mill Creek did, with a small misunderstanding that no one meant to fix. Ruth Holloway parked her 2003 Buick across the street from First National Heritage Bank and checked the folder in her lap one more time. The power of attorney documents were there, signed and notarized. The cashier's check was folded inside a cover letter, $500,000 drawn on her son's account, with documentation explaining the transfer to the scholarship endowment she was establishing on his behalf. She'd double-checked everything the night before, and again at the kitchen table that morning with her coffee. She was a careful woman. 31 years as a hospice nurse had made her that way. First National Heritage occupied the ground floor of the Mill Creek Commerce Center, a glass and steel building that hadn't existed when Ruth was raising her son in the valley below. The lobby was cool and quiet, the kind of quiet that money creates. At the curved reception desk, a young woman smiled as Ruth came through the revolving door. The smile lasted long enough to take in the jacket from Goodwill, the canvas bag, the sensible shoes. Then it rearranged itself into something more careful. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to deposit a check and sign some account transfer documents," Ruth said. "I have an appointment confirmation." She produced the printout. The receptionist glanced at it. "This is for the private banking floor. We handle significant account holders here." "I'm aware," Ruth said pleasantly. "That's why I made the appointment." She was directed to a row of chairs along the east wall. Someone would be right with her. Ruth sat down and folded her hands in her lap. Across the lobby, 2 men in dark suits were being escorted toward the glass partition by a manager who had come out specifically to greet them. Hand extended before the door was fully open, voice warm, the small performance of importance that distinguished some clients from others. There was a tray of water bottles on a side table near the entrance. No one offered her one. After 11 minutes, a woman at the teller window waved her forward. She introduced herself as Shelley Pruitt, head of client services. The smile was professionally even. "The check and your ID," Shelley said. Ruth set both on the counter along with the folder. Shelley looked at the check. Something shifted in her face, not surprise exactly. More like skepticism crystallizing into something harder. "This is a very large amount," Shelley said. "Yes. It's a gift from my son for a scholarship endowment he's establishing. I hold power of attorney for his personal accounts. The documentation is in the folder." Shelley examined the power of attorney with the look of someone reading a document she hadn't expected to be real. She set it aside. "I'll need to verify this. Please take a seat." Ruth sat back down. The 2 men in suits were laughing at something near the manager's office. Toward the far end of the teller row, a young man, maybe 28, with the quiet alertness of someone who actually paid attention, glanced at the check on Shelley's counter, glanced at Ruth, and looked away. 12 more minutes passed. No one came back. Ruth stood, walked to the counter again, and said as politely as she had before, "Is there anything you need from me? We're still verifying." Shelley didn't look up. The power of attorney was notarized through the West Virginia Secretary of State's office, Ruth said. "If there's a number you need to call, ma'am." Shelley's voice was quiet but surgical. "We serve very high net worth clients in this branch. I'm sure you understand we need to be thorough about what we process." Ruth understood exactly what was being communicated. She had spent 31 years in rooms where people said difficult things that needed to be heard anyway. She placed both hands flat on the counter. "Could I please speak with the branch manager?" Shelley lifted the phone and spoke in a low voice. A minute later, the door to the corner office opened and a man in his mid-50s stepped out, silver-haired, well-tailored, carrying his posture the way men do when they have been in charge long enough for the body to believe it. He surveyed the lobby from the doorway. His eyes found Ruth. He took in the jacket, the bag, the shoes. He started walking toward her. He had not brought water. He had not put on his full smile. He walked the way people walk when they are about to do something they have decided is efficient. Gerald Marsh had a particular way of handling situations like this. Situations where someone had wandered into the wrong branch or presented documentation that didn't quite add up or seemed unable to grasp. That First National Heritage wasn't the kind of institution that processed walk-in business from unestablished clients. He'd dealt with it before. The trick was to be courteous but direct, to give the person a clean off-ramp without embarrassing either party more than necessary. He was good at this. He considered it a skill. He stopped in front of Ruth and looked at her the way he'd looked at the folder, briefly, as though confirming a conclusion he'd already formed. "I understand there may be some confusion," he said, his tone so practiced it almost sounded warm. "This branch services a very specific clientele." "There's no confusion," Ruth said. "I have a valid appointment, a notarized power of attorney, and a cashier's check for deposit. My son holds accounts here. His name is Nathan Holloway. If you'd like to verify the account number, I know our account holders personally," Gerald said. "All of our significant clients." He paused. "I'm not familiar with that name. You may know the account through Holloway Capital or through the Holloway Foundation. He may be in the process of formalizing the account transfer here. I'm here to sign the initial documentation and complete the first deposit." Gerald glanced at Shelley, who had brought the folder to stand a few feet behind him. He opened it to the cashier's check, looked at the amount, looked at Ruth, looked back at the check. "Where did this originate?" "It was drawn on my son's account at First Continental Bank, pursuant to the transfer agreement." The account number and the originating bank's contact information are on the cover letter. "This amount is $500,000, Ruth said, "for the scholarship endowment." The documentation explains the structure. There's also a transfer authorization for the remainder of the personal account balance once the new account is established. Gerald's expression didn't shift, but something behind it did. He handed the folder back to Shelley without looking at it again. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The lobby quieted. Not because many people were watching, but because the few who were had all stilled at once. "Excuse me," Ruth said. "I can't process this." His voice had gone harder at the edges, though it remained controlled. "This document doesn't originate from an established account holder in our system. The amount is outside our standard processing parameters for unverified clients. Our compliance team would need to flag this for full review. That process takes 3 to 5 business days minimum, and today isn't the appropriate time to initiate it." He straightened slightly. "I'd recommend you return with additional forms of identification, and if possible with an attorney present." "I have power of attorney," Ruth said. "A power of attorney from an account name I cannot confirm exists in our system." Gerald said, presenting a check for an amount that exceeds our threshold for unverified client processing. Ma'am. He said the word the way some men say it, not as courtesy, but as punctuation. I'm asking you to leave. At the far end of the teller row, James Whitmore had stopped moving entirely. He was watching in the particular stillness of someone memorizing something they expect to need later. Ruth looked at Gerald for a long moment. She had the look of a woman who has seen a great deal of human behavior and has learned to name it accurately. She gathered her folder and her bag. Gerald turned to Shelley and said quietly, "Please have security see our visitor out." He glanced at Ruth. "Have her check returned." Shelley picked up the phone. James Whitmore, below the sightline of his workstation counter, slid his personal cell phone from his pocket. He opened the camera. He photographed the cashier's check lying on the counter beside him, the one Shelley had set aside earlier and not yet returned. He photographed the cover letter behind it, the one with the account numbers and the contact details from First Continental. He returned the phone to his pocket before Shelley hung up the receiver. The security guard was a man named Bob Garrett. 53 years old, had worked the branch for 11 years, had seen Gerald make this kind of request before. He didn't say anything harsh. He simply asked Ruth if she'd like to be walked to the door. "I know the way," Ruth said. She walked across the lobby with her folder and her bag. She did not look around at the watching's faces. She did not say anything to anyone. She pushed through the revolving door into the October air, crossed to the bench along the sidewalk outside, and sat down. She placed the folder across her knees and looked at the street in front of her. The Mill Creek Commerce Center, the bank's polished logo in the window, the parking structure across the way. She was not crying. She had not cried in the lobby, and she was not going to cry here. She was thinking in the methodical way of a woman who has processed difficult things her whole life about what needed to happen next. On the other side of the street, Carol Ashton's silver Subaru was parked in the second row of the lot. Carol, 62 years old, Ruth's neighbor for 27 years, had been waiting since the appointment time. She came around the hood of her car and crossed the street quickly when she saw Ruth on the bench, because Ruth on a bench outside was not a version of this morning that Carol had prepared for. She sat down beside Ruth without asking. Ruth turned and looked at her. "He said I was confused," Ruth said. "He said my documentation didn't originate from a recognized account holder." Carol looked through the glass door at Bob Garrett standing watch inside. She took out her phone and began to film. Ruth set her hand flat on the folder in her lap. Then she took out her own phone and dialed her son. Nathan Holloway was in the back booth of Amos's diner when his phone rang the booth by the window that looked out over the corner of Main and 3rd, where the old hardware store had stood until 2 years ago, and now sat empty behind a chain-link fence. He'd been looking at site survey documents for 40 minutes, a cup of black coffee going cold at his elbow. He was in Mill Creek for infrastructure work, quiet, preliminary, the kind of due diligence that came before anything was announced publicly. He'd been here 4 days and had told no one except his assistant and Diana Chen. He was wearing a flannel shirt and work boots. He hadn't shaved since Sunday. His phone showed his mother's name. He picked up. "Nathan." Ruth's voice was even the same register she used when she needed to tell him something without alarming him first. "I went to the bank this morning, the Heritage branch. I had the power of attorney and the check for the scholarship fund." "Okay," he said. "They wouldn't process it." "The manager, a man named Marsh, he said he couldn't confirm the account, that my documentation wasn't from a recognized account holder. He called security. I was walked out." A pause. Carol was with me. She filmed part of it. Nathan set down the survey document. He was quiet for a moment, the way he was quiet when he was thinking past the first response to the one he'd actually want to have said. Did they give back everything they had? The check, the cover letter. Yes, they returned it all. Are you okay? I'm fine. Another pause. I just wanted you to know. Don't go back, he said. I'll take care of it. Are you going home now? Carol's with me? We're going home. Good. I'll come by this afternoon. He hung up and sat for a moment with his phone in his hand. Through the diner window, 2 blocks up Main Street, he could see the glass and steel face of the Mill Creek Commerce Center. He'd walked past it twice this week on his way to the planning office. Hadn't gone in. He opened his laptop, went to his foundation email account, scrolled back 4 months. The email chain was still there. He'd read it once when it first arrived, flagged it and moved on because the foundation received dozens of similar requests every month, and the grant cycle wasn't open. Gerald W. Marsh Branch, President, First National Heritage Bank. 14 messages over the course of 4 months, each one more elaborately courteous than the last. Nathan scrolled to the most recent. We remain honored by the Foundation's consideration and deeply committed to the communities of Appalachia. Our branch has a long history of serving the Mill Creek region's most vulnerable residents, and we believe the Foundation's Community Investment Initiative would find a thoughtful partner in our team. We look forward to any opportunity to connect. He read it again. Then he opened his contacts and called Diana Chen. She answered on the second ring. You're still in West Virginia. Something came up. How soon can you be in Mill Creek? A pause, not hesitation. Just Diana thinking. What kind of something? My mother went to the Heritage Branch this morning with the power of attorney and the scholarship check. The branch president called security and had her escorted out. Silence on Diana's end. The kind of silence that came before precision. Was she hurt? No. Humiliated. She had all the right documentation. He didn't look at it. I see. Another pause. Is this about what happened to your mother, or is there something more? Nathan looked at the email chain on his screen. 14 messages. A man who had written 14 earnest emails about serving vulnerable communities had spent that same period running a branch that turned away legitimate clients based on what they were wearing. I don't know yet, he said. That's why I need you here. I can be there tomorrow morning. I'll take the 6 o'clock. Thank you. He closed the laptop. He left a 20 on the table for the coffee he hadn't finished, picked up the survey documents, and walked to his rental truck, a 3-year-old pickup that he kept in Mill Creek for whenever he was in town. He'd bought it secondhand from a man who worked at the lumberyard and hadn't mentioned why he wanted it. He turned left out of the parking lot onto 3rd Street and drove toward the valley. The name had been there in the back of his mind since his mother said it. Gerald Marsh. He'd placed it now not from the email chain, but from somewhere older. A different building, a different decade, a summer afternoon when he was 16 years old and had stood in front of a town council table with a handwritten application for a county-funded summer work program. The man at the end of the table, who had looked at him the way Gerald Marsh must have looked at Ruth that morning, had said, "We appreciate your interest, son. But this program is competitive, and we think there are more suitable applicants for the positions we have available." He had looked at Nathan the whole time he said it, and Nathan had understood exactly what he was being told without being told. He drove toward Carver Street. He drove carefully the way he had learned to be careful with things that needed to be handled right. The house on Carver Street was the same house it had always been. White aluminum siding, a front porch with 2 chairs, a window box with late-season marigolds that Ruth had planted in August and wasn't ready to give up on yet. Nathan had offered to buy her something larger, something with more land, more rooms, a proper driveway. She'd said she liked where she was. She liked knowing her neighbors, She liked that the marigolds got afternoon sun. He parked in the street and walked up the path. Carol's Subaru was already there in the narrow driveway beside the house. Ruth met him at the door. She looked the same as always, upright, unhurried, wearing the green cardigan she'd had for years. She handed him a cup of coffee before he'd sat down, because she had known he would come and had made it before he arrived. They sat at the kitchen table. Carol was already there across from Ruth with her own cup. The folder was on the table between them, everything returned and intact. The check, the cover letter, the power of attorney, all of it. Ruth told him the story again from the beginning, calmly, with the same precision with which she'd described things on the phone, and he listened the way he always listened to her, without interrupting, without filling in the spaces. When she finished, Carol said, "I have some of it on my phone. Not the beginning, I didn't have the phone out yet. But the end, when they walked her out." "Can I see it?" Nathan said. Carol handed him the phone. He watched it. 40 seconds of footage, shaky, taken through the glass door, slightly washed out from the sunlight. Ruth crossing the lobby with Bob Garrett beside her. The way her back was straight the entire time. The way she didn't look at any of the people watching. He watched it again without saying anything. The third time, he paused it on Gerald Marsh, visible through the glass in the background, near the teller counter, already turned away and speaking to Shelley Pruitt. He handed the phone back to Carol. "His name," he said. "Gerald Marsh." Ruth looked at him. "You know him, not recently." He picked up his coffee. "The town council used to run a summer work program for high school kids from the valley. When I was 16, I applied." Carol set down her cup. Ruth was very still. "He was on the panel," Nathan said. "He didn't use my name. He said there were more suitable applicants." He took a drink of the coffee. "I always thought I'd remember what it felt like to stand in front of a table and be told something that way." "I did." Neither Ruth nor Carol said anything for a moment. "I didn't know that," Ruth said finally. "You didn't need to know it," Nathan said. "I handled it." He opened his laptop on the table and turned it so they could both see the screen. The email chain. 14 messages, Gerald Marsh's name at the top of each thread, addressed to the Holloway Foundation's General Grants inbox. "He's been writing to me," Nathan said. "To the foundation. For 4 months. Asking for a meeting about a community development grant." He scrolled to the most recent message. "The branch has been underperforming. He needs the foundation's $12 million to save his position. He's been very persistent." Carol read over his shoulder. Her expression changed the way expressions do when something funny and something terrible occupy the same space at once. "He doesn't know," she said. "He doesn't know," Nathan confirmed. Ruth looked at the email. She looked at it for a while. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" Nathan closed the laptop. "I need 2 days to understand the full picture before I do anything. I don't want to walk in there and have this be about you and me and him. I want to walk in there with the full picture. Whatever that picture turns out to be." He looked at his mother. "Is that all right with you?" Ruth considered this the way she considered most things, without hurry, without performance. "You don't need my permission," she said. "But yes." "That's all right." "Good." He stood up. "Don't go back to the bank. Don't call them. If they contact you, you let me know." "They won't contact me," Ruth said. "They think I'm nobody." Nathan looked at her. Then at the woman who had worked double shifts at the hospice to keep the electricity on, who had eaten toast for dinner so he could eat properly, who had sat beside him at the kitchen table every night for 18 years, helping him with homework. She barely had the energy to read. The woman who had never once asked him for anything after he'd built his company. "They're wrong about that," he said. He kissed her on the forehead, said goodbye to Carol, and walked back out to the pickup truck. He sat in the cab for a moment, before starting the engine, looking at the marigolds in the window box, at the white aluminum siding at the house where he had grown up, and that Ruth had refused to leave. He took out his phone and sent Diana a message. "Bring everything you have on First National Heritage Bank's financial filings for the last 2 years. Then he drove back toward town. Diana Chen arrived on the 6:15 from Washington Dulles and drove herself from Charleston in a rental car without telling Nathan she was coming early. She found him at the motel on Route 9 at 7:20 in the morning, already at the small table with his laptop and the bank's last 2 years of annual reports spread in front of him. She set her bag down, poured herself a cup from the motel coffee maker, and sat across from him. "Tell me what you found," she said. He turned the laptop to face her. As part of his due diligence on the Mill Creek infrastructure project, Nathan had been reviewing all major local financial institutions, First National Heritage included. It was routine. He looked at everything before he committed capital to a new market. The bank's publicly filed financial disclosures were a matter of public record accessible through the state banking regulator's portal, and he downloaded them the previous week as part of a broader review packet. He hadn't flagged anything unusual at the time, but he hadn't been looking for anything unusual at the time. Now he was. Diana worked through the filings methodically. She had done this long enough that she could read a balance sheet the way other people read a news article quickly, with an eye for what was missing as much as what was present. She was quiet for 20 minutes. Nathan refilled her coffee without being asked. "Here," she said finally. She turned the laptop back toward him and pointed to a line in the branch's service fee statement. "Administrative services. 18 months. Here and here and here." She indicated 3 separate quarterly filings. The amounts don't add up to any disclosed fee structure. They're not tied to a specific account category or service tier. They're just there. $340,000, spread across 18 months, classified as administrative services. Nathan looked at the numbers. "Could be legitimate. Could be," Diana said. "If it were tied to a disclosed vendor contract or an internal allocation adjustment, we'd see a corresponding line in the operating expense ledger. We don't. We see the outflow. We don't see where it went." Nathan sat back. "What do you need to trace it?" "A bank statement from the receiving account, which we don't have access to. What we have is the public disclosure which tells us money moved and doesn't tell us where." She looked at him steadily. "We need someone inside the branch who processed these transactions. Someone who can tell us what vendor name appeared on the override authorizations." They both sat with that for a moment. There was someone, Nathan said, in the branch. "He was watching when they turned my mother away. He didn't say anything, but he was watching in a particular way. Young, early 30s maybe at the far end of the teller row. You think he knows something. I think he saw what happened and kept it. People who keep things have usually been keeping other things too." Nathan stood and walked to the window. The motel faced a parking lot, and beyond it, the back of a strip mall, but further up the hill, the edge of the commerce center was visible against the morning sky. "I'll approach him today. Off premises, off hours." Diana nodded. She returned to the filings. "There's something else," she said after another 10 minutes. "A notation in the regulatory correspondence section of the 2024 filing. A client complaint filed with the West Virginia Division of Financial Institutions, account access denial, senior client resolved internally." She looked at him. "That's the kind of language that appears when a complaint was made. The bank filed a response, and the regulator accepted the bank's explanation without further inquiry. It means someone complained. Someone was told their complaint was handled, and the bank wrote its own description of how. What's the client's name? The filing doesn't include it. Regulatory complaints at this stage are summarized, not named. She paused. But there's a date. March of last year. Nathan noted the date. He would ask James Whitmore about it if that was the young man's name, which he hadn't confirmed yet. He had looked up the branch staff directory on the Heritage website the previous evening and matched the face he'd seen in the lobby to a name: James Whitmore, Associate Client Services Representative. He picked up his phone. I'll set up a meeting with him for this afternoon. He looked at Diana. What do you need from me while I do that? A copy of the power of attorney your mother had with her, and confirmation that the check was a legitimate instrument. I want to be able to document that everything your mother brought to that bank was entirely valid before we go any further. I have the originals. I'll get them to you by noon. Diana nodded and turned back to the filings. She had the look she always had when she was working, completely present, completely unhurried, occupying the problem like a building she intended to understand from the foundation up. Nathan had trusted her for 15 years because she never overreached and never underestimated. She had told him twice in those 15 years to slow down, and she had been right both times. Nathan, she said without looking up, whatever happened to your mother, that's the precipitating incident. But if this fee anomaly is what I think it is, that's the problem this bank has been sitting on for 18 months. We may be dealing with something significantly larger than one bad interaction. I know, he said. That changes how we handle this. If there's misconduct, we don't go in as a wronged client. We go in with regulators. I know, he said again. He picked up his jacket and his keys. Outside, the morning was gray and still, the kind of October in West Virginia that smells like wood smoke and cold water. Let's make sure we have everything first, he said. James Whitmore was eating a sandwich at a corner table in Amos's diner when Nathan sat down across from him. James looked up. He recognized Nathan from the branch. Not his name, not who he was, just his face. He'd seen Nathan come in once to the lobby a few days before Ruth's appointment, looking at blueprints with one of the county planning officials. He remembered thinking the man looked more like someone who worked outside than someone who worked in an office, which meant he probably had more money than people who looked like they had money. I'm connected to Ruth Holloway's situation, Nathan said. I saw what happened. I want to understand the full picture before I do anything about it. I'm not here to get you in trouble. I'm here because I think you know things you haven't had a way to say yet. James set down the sandwich. He looked at Nathan for a long moment, the kind of look that is actually a question assessing whether the offer is real. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and took out his phone. I photographed the check, he said, and the cover letter, before Shelley filed them away. I did it because I knew what was about to happen, and I wanted there to be a record that the documentation was legitimate. He found the images and turned the phone to face Nathan. $500,000 on a cashier's check drawn from First Continental Bank. The account number, the contact information, the power of attorney reference number. It was all real. Everything she brought was completely real. Nathan looked at the images. He didn't say anything. James put the phone back in his pocket. He looked it out the window for a moment at Main Street, at the parking lot of the Commerce Center visible at the far end of the block. There's more, he said. He reached into his bag, a worn canvas messenger bag, and took out a notebook. Not a bank notebook. A personal one, the kind with a cardboard cover and grid-ruled pages, the kind you buy at a drugstore. He set it on the table. 7 months, he said. I've been keeping this for 7 months. Since March. Nathan waited. The fees started showing up in March. Small amounts at first, service charges on accounts that weren't supposed to carry service charges because the clients had account structures that waived fees. Then larger ones. Override authorizations through Shelley's login, then through mine. I found one through my login that I never entered. Someone had used my credentials to authorize a fee override on a small business account. He touched the notebook. I wrote it all down. Everyone I found. The amounts, the dates, the account category, the authorization login. The name that kept appearing on the vendor line of the Override Horizon Advisory LLC. Nathan looked at the notebook. Did you report any of it? I emailed compliance in May. James's voice was steady, but there was something tired in it. Internal compliance through the branch. I got a response from Gerald's assistant saying the transactions had been reviewed and were consistent with current administrative service protocols. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if I was misunderstanding something. I kept writing things down because I didn't know what else to do. You were afraid, Nathan said. It wasn't an accusation. Gerald controls every review in that branch. If I went outside the branch to report, I'd need to be sure, completely sure. Because if I was wrong or if they buried it again, I'd be done. James looked at him. I needed someone to ask. Someone who could actually do something with it. Nathan nodded. He understood this precisely. What do you know about Horizon Advisory LLC? Nothing. I couldn't find a public record for it. It's not a local company, no listing with the State Business Registry that I could find using public searches. He paused. I know one more thing, and it's about your mother specifically. He looked directly at Nathan. After Gerald walked her out, he marked her check in the system as suspected fraudulent presentation. That notation is now in the Heritage Network. Any bank that pulls her name, any institution that runs the check number, is going to see that flag. She's been marked as someone who presented a fraudulent instrument. The diner was quiet around them. The lunch rush had passed. A woman at the counter was reading a newspaper. The cook was moving something around in the kitchen with a sound like a skillet on a burner. One more thing, James said. He had been holding this one back, Nathan could tell, by the way he said it carefully, like something he'd been deciding whether to include. In March, before the fees. There was a client named Miriam Foster, 78 years old. She came in twice trying to access her accounts. She was trying to settle some of her financial affairs because she'd been told she had less than 6 months. Gerald flagged her documentation for compliance review both times. Said the documentation couldn't be verified. The review was never cleared. He paused. She died in June. Her family has been trying to settle the estate for 3 months, and the account is frozen because of Gerald's compliance flags. They have an attorney, but it's going slowly. Nathan sat with this. The coffee in front of him had gone cold. He left it. Will you submit a formal statement? He asked. Everything in the notebook, the photographs, Miriam Foster, a written statement to a regulatory body. James looked at him steadily. If you can tell me it will go somewhere. If you can tell me it won't just disappear into an internal review that Gerald writes the response to. It won't, Nathan said. I can promise you that. James picked up the notebook and slid it across the table. Keep it, he said. I have copies. Arthur Osgood had been the regional director of First National Heritage's Appalachian District for 9 years, and he had learned in those 9 years that problems at the branch level came in 2 varieties, the kind that resolved themselves with a careful phone call and the kind that did not. He was reasonably good at telling the difference. On Wednesday afternoon, he was reviewing flagged account transactions from the Mill Creek branch, a routine audit that happened monthly, that he had delegated to a junior analyst and then undelegated to himself 6 months ago, because the junior analyst kept missing things when a name in the flagged transaction log stopped him. Holloway Ruth A. Power of Attorney, Nathan G. Holloway account. Cashier's check $500,000. Status suspected fraudulent presentation. Action client escorted from premises. Arthur ran the name Nathan G. Holloway through the financial directory database his office used for account verification. The result came back in 4 seconds. Nathan Gerald Holloway, founder and principal Holloway Capital Group. Total estimated assets $2.4 billion. Founder and chairman Holloway Foundation annual grant budget $48 million. Active community development programs in 7 Appalachian states. Arthur read this. Read it again. He looked out his office window at the mountains visible from the 12th floor of the Charleston regional office and thought very specifically, Gerald Marsh will be the end of this branch. He called Gerald's direct line. Gerald picked up on the second ring. Arthur, good afternoon. Tell me, Arthur said carefully, that you did not yesterday refuse service to and physically remove from the premises the mother of Nathan Holloway. The silence on Gerald's end lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough to confirm everything. Arthur, there was a situation, the documentation couldn't be verified. We followed standard protocol. Gerald. Arthur stopped him. Call him. Today. And then call me back. He hung up and sat for a moment with his hands flat on his desk. Then he pulled up the 14 email chain that his office had received from Gerald Marsh over the previous 4 months, each one requesting a meeting with the Holloway Foundation about a community development grant, each one more carefully worded than the last. In Gerald Marsh's office at the Mill Creek Commerce Center, the branch president stared at his phone for 30 seconds after Arthur's call ended. Then he opened his contacts and found the Holloway Foundation's general number, which he had called twice before, and been routed to an administrative assistant who had told him the grant cycle was not currently open. Today he bypassed the foundation and searched for a direct number. He called Nathan Holloway's office. He was routed to a voicemail. He left a message. He called back. Left another message. He found a secondary contact number through the Holloway Capital Group's website. Called it. Voicemail. He called the foundation's grants inbox. He was connected to an assistant who told him Mr. Holloway was traveling and unavailable. He called the assistant back, left a longer message. He called the general number again. He called the secondary contact. He called the foundation's main line. He called Arthur Osgood back. Arthur told him to keep trying. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Gerald had called Nathan Holloway 15 times from 2 different numbers. At the 15th call, Nathan picked up. Gerald had been preparing what he would say since the first unanswered call, and the preparation had not helped as much as he'd hoped. His voice came out slightly too fast, slightly too careful. Mr. Holloway, thank you for taking my call. I want to be completely transparent with you about what occurred at our Mill Creek branch yesterday morning. There was a situation involving a client who presented documentation that our staff couldn't immediately verify through our standard protocols. And I want you to know that everything was handled with the utmost care and concern for the client's well-being. Nathan listened. And I deeply regret that there was any disruption to your mother's experience. It was never my intention, Nathan listened. And I hope we can speak directly about how to resolve this in a way that is satisfactory to your family and reflects the genuine respect that First National Heritage has for all of our clients. Nathan listened until Gerald ran out of prepared language and fell into a brief silence. Then Nathan said, "Thank you for calling Mr. Marsh." He hung up. Gerald sat at his desk with the phone in his hand. He sat for long enough that Shelley Pruitt, passing in the hallway, looked in through the glass panel and saw him there and didn't knock. Then he called her in. "Pull Ruth Holloway's client file," he said. "The one from yesterday." Shelley pulled it up on the terminal. Gerald leaned over and read the current notation, the one generated during the incident. the one that documented that Ruth had presented a cashier's check marked as suspected fraudulent. "Add a note," Gerald said. Client arrived in an agitated state. Identity documentation appeared irregular. Security escort was provided as a precautionary wellness measure per branch protocol. He read it back to her. "Make sure it's dated yesterday." Shelley typed it in. Her hands moved steadily enough. Gerald watched the screen. At the far end of the teller row, visible through the glass partition between the main floor and the administrative area, James Whitmore sat at his terminal. The modification had appeared in the shared client file system at the same moment Gerald dictated it. James watched the activity log update in the corner of his screen branch. President login file accessed notation added timestamp. He opened a new window and took a screenshot. Then he sent Nathan a text message. No explanation, just the image. Diana had the complete financial picture by Thursday morning. Horizon Advisory LLC was registered with the West Virginia Secretary of State's office in February of the previous year, 14 months before Nathan and Diana were looking at it, 8 months before James Whitmore had begun keeping his notebook. The registered agent was a firm in Morgantown, used by hundreds of LLCs throughout the state, which was not unusual. The single member was listed as Daniel R. Pruitt at a residential address in Barbersville. Diana ran Daniel Pruitt through public records. He had no financial industry credentials, no business history in banking or investment advisory. His name appeared in a property record, a voter registration, and one relevant document, a marriage certificate filed in Kanawha County 6 years ago. He had married a woman named Sandra Louise Marsh. Sandra Louise Marsh, née Marsh, Gerald's sister. Brother-in-law, Nathan said. Brother-in-law, Diana confirmed. Horizon Advisory LLC has no public record of any clients, any services performed, or any income other than what was routed from First National Heritage's Administrative Services line. It is, as far as I can determine, a company that exists for the purpose of receiving these payments, and nothing else. They were in the motel room. Nathan was standing at the window. Diana had 2 laptops open on the table, one with the financial filings and one with the corporate registry. Shelley Pruitt's signature is on some of the override authorizations, Diana continued. She authorized 11 of the 37 transactions. Gerald authorized the rest. Shelley's role appears to have been operational. She processed the transactions when Gerald wasn't available. I don't believe she established the scheme. I believe she was told it was an internal adjustment and chose not to examine it too carefully. That still makes her complicit. Yes. But it changes the nature of the complicity. Diana looked at him. I want to be precise about this. We have James's photographs proving your mother's documentation was legitimate. The screenshot showing the file modification timestamp, Gerald's login, the notation. James's notebook documenting 7 months of fee irregularities. The financial filings tracing the administrative services outflow to Horizon Advisory. The corporate registry linking Horizon Advisory to Gerald's brother-in-law. And the Miriam Foster estate, her family's attorney will cooperate. I've spoken with them. That's a complete case, Nathan said. It's a complete case for the regulator, Diana said. But before we file, I want to show you something. She turned the second laptop to face him. It was an email received on Nathan's main business account, not the foundation account, but his personal business email. The sender was an external PR firm. The subject line, First National Heritage Bank Client Experience Inquiry. Nathan leaned forward and read it. The email was from a PR firm called Whitfield Communications, retained by First National Heritage. It expressed that the firm had been engaged to address a service experience concern involving a client relationship of significant sensitivity. It noted that private and expedient resolution was possible, and that the firm's client was eager to discuss arrangements that address all parties' concerns in a manner consistent with mutual discretion and respect. It included a draft non-disclosure agreement as an attachment. Nathan opened the attachment. The NDA was 2 pages. It would have required Nathan to agree that no complaints, regulatory filings, or public statements would be made in connection with the service incident of October 7th, in exchange for a payment to be negotiated. They wanted to pay him to stay quiet. They hired this firm before calling me, Nathan said. Yes. The PR firm's engagement was probably initiated within hours of Gerald learning your identity. The email came to you through a contact form on the Holloway Capital website. They didn't have your direct address. Diana paused. The NDA offer tells us they understand exactly how serious this is. It also tells us that Gerald's primary concern is not your mother. It's himself. Nathan read the NDA through to the end and set the laptop down. We're not accepting that, he said. I assumed not. Diana closed both laptops and stacked them neatly. I'll file the complaint with the Division of Financial Institutions tonight. I'll also send a certified letter to the bank's full board of directors requesting an emergency meeting within 72 hours. Arthur Osgood sits on the board. He'll make sure the meeting happens. Do it. Diana picked up her phone and began drafting the complaint. Nathan went to the window again. The October afternoon was already going gray at the edges, the light flattening early the way it did in the mountains. He thought about what James Whitmore had told him, about a careful man who had kept records alone for 7 months, waiting for someone to ask. He thought about Miriam Foster, 78 years old, who had come to the bank twice in her last months of life and been turned away both times, and who had died with her accounts frozen. He thought about his mother at the kitchen table reading the folder one more time before she left that morning, because she was careful and she wanted everything to be right. The PR firm's email was still open on the screen behind him. Private and expedient resolution, mutual discretion. He did not close the laptop. The item appeared on the Mill Creek Courier's website on Thursday afternoon in the local news section between a school board meeting summary and an announcement about road closures on Route 60. It was 4 sentences long. First National Heritage Bank staff responded Monday to a service incident at the Mill Creek Commerce Center branch involving an elderly female patron who appeared to be in a state of disorientation. Branch personnel provided a courtesy wellness escort to assist the patron. A spokesperson for the bank confirmed that staff acted in accordance with branch protocol and that the patron's welfare was the primary concern throughout the interaction. First National Heritage Bank remains committed to serving all community members with care and professionalism. Carol Ashton saw it at 3:47 in the afternoon. She recognized the description immediately and the particular chill that came with it, not the rudeness of the original incident, but something worse. She called Ruth before she'd finished reading. Ruth read it on her phone sitting at the kitchen table. She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the table and sat with her hands in her lap for a while looking at the window. She had been a hospice nurse for 31 years. She had watched people have their realities questioned, their pain managed and minimized and reframed by institutions that needed the record to say something other than what had happened. She recognized this. She knew exactly what it was. She picked up her phone and called Nathan. He answered on the first ring. "Mom. I read something online," she said. "About Monday, about me. I know. I saw it. They said I appeared disoriented." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Not upset exactly, something more controlled than upset something that had found its name and was holding it. "Nathan, I want you to know something. I was not confused. I was not disoriented. I had every piece of documentation I needed. I parked in a legal space, I walked through the correct entrance, I provided the correct documents in the correct order, and I waited as many times as they asked me to wait. I knew exactly where I was and what I was doing the entire time. Her voice was steady. I just needed to say that to someone. I know, Mom, Nathan said. I know all of that. A pause. Okay, Ruth said. That's all. They said goodbye. Nathan set his phone down on the motel room table. Diana was at the second laptop, the draft complaint open in front of her. She hadn't stopped working, but she'd heard the call. We file tonight, Nathan said. I was going to say the same thing. She looked at him. The article changes the timeline. If that narrative spreads, if other outlets pick it up, if the bank's PR firm amplifies it, it becomes the version of events that gets attached to your mother's name. Every search, every future context. She paused. We need to be filed before they can do anything else with it. Nathan nodded. Diana completed the formal complaint to the West Virginia Division of Financial Institutions that evening. Attaching James's photographs, the file modification screenshot with timestamps, the fee analysis connecting outflows to Horizon Advisory LLC, the corporate registry documents identifying Daniel Pruitt as Gerald's brother-in-law, and James Whitmore's formal written statement, which James had submitted by email that afternoon, 3 pages, careful and specific, with every transaction date and dollar amount cross-referenced to his notebook. The complaint named Gerald Marsh by position and documented 3 categories of misconduct: discriminatory denial of service to a client with valid documentation, fraudulent modification of a client record following a complaint incident, and misappropriation of client service fees to a related party entity over an 18-month period. Alongside the regulatory complaint, Diana sent a certified letter to the full board of directors of First National Heritage Bank. The letter was addressed to each board member by name. It requested an emergency meeting within 72 hours to review findings relevant to the branch's compliance and financial reporting practices. It noted that a regulatory complaint had been filed and that a formal presentation of evidence would be made available to the board in advance of or during the meeting. Arthur Osgood received his copy of the certified letter at his home address at 6:15 that evening by courier. He read it in the kitchen with his wife, asking questions he couldn't answer yet. He called the bank's general counsel at 6:30. He called 3 other board members before 8 o'clock. The meeting was scheduled for 7 the next morning. Gerald Marsh received a call from the bank's general counsel at 8:45 that evening, informing him that an emergency board session had been convened and that his attendance was required at 7 the following morning. The general counsel did not tell him the subject. He said the board chair would review the agenda at the opening of the meeting. Gerald called Arthur Osgood 3 times that night. Arthur didn't pick up. He poured himself a drink and sat in his study. On his desk was the draft of a follow-up email he had been preparing for the Holloway Foundation, a longer, more detailed version of the 14 he'd already sent this one, incorporating specific references to the Foundation's existing grant criteria, and arguing at length that First National Heritage's community development record made the branch a natural partner. He looked at the draft for a long time and then closed the laptop. The emergency board meeting was held in the 3rd-floor conference room of the First National Heritage Regional Office in Charleston, a room with a long table, 8 chairs, and windows that looked east toward the mountains. 6 board members were present. Arthur Osgood sat at the head of the table. Gerald Marsh sat toward the far end beside the bank's general counsel, a man named Fitch, who had spent the previous evening reviewing everything he could find and had come to the meeting looking like he hadn't slept. Nathan and Diana arrived at 7 on the mark. Nathan was wearing the same flannel shirt he'd had on at the diner. Diana was in a gray blazer with her briefcase flat on the table in front of her. 2 of the board members looked at Nathan's shirt and then at each other. Arthur Osgood looked at Nathan and nodded, once the nod of a man who understood that appearances were exactly the subject of this meeting. Diana opened without preamble. "I'm going to present 4 categories of evidence," she said. "I'll move through them in order. I'd ask that questions be held until the end." The first was the CCTV footage. She connected a laptop to the screen at the end of the room. The footage was from 4 cameras: the lobby entrance, the teller counter, the seating area, and the main floor overview. She played the relevant sequence: Ruth entering, speaking to the receptionist, sitting, being called to the counter, speaking with Shelley, being sent back to sit, returning to the counter, Shelley calling Gerald, emerging, the confrontation, the security escort. The room was silent throughout. 9 minutes of footage. One of the board members, a woman in her 60s, stopped writing notes partway through and did not start again. When the footage ended, Diana moved without pausing. Second, the client file modification. She displayed the system activity log from the branch's client management software. Gerald Marsh's login. The timestamp: 4 hours after Ruth had been escorted from the building, 12 minutes after the call from Arthur Osgood. The original notation on Ruth's file, the modified notation, side by side. The original notation documented the check as suspected fraudulent presentation, Diana said. The modified notation entered by Mr. Marsh on Mr. Marsh's login at 3:47 p.m. on the day of the incident changed the characterization to a voluntary wellness escort for a client in an agitated state. She paused. "We have a forensic timestamp from the system provider confirming these are the only 2 versions of this notation, and that no other edits were made to the file between them." Gerald looked at his hands on the table. He did not look at Arthur Osgood. Fitch, his attorney, wrote something in the margin of his notepad and underlined it. Third, the fee misappropriation. Diana presented Diana's financial analysis in full, the administrative services anomaly across 18 months. The outflow amounts, the destination entity, Horizon Advisory LLC, the corporate registry linking Horizon Advisory's sole member to Gerald Marsh's brother-in-law. She then presented James Whitmore's formal statement and the corresponding notebook entries, cross-referencing specific transactions by date, amount, and authorization login. Shelley Pruitt's login appears as the authorizing party on 11 of the 37 transactions, Diana said. She has cooperated fully with our inquiry and has stated that she was told by Mr. Marsh that these were internal administrative allocation adjustments, authorized by the regional office. We do not believe she initiated this arrangement. Fitch wrote something else in his notepad. Gerald's posture had changed. He was sitting more upright now, in the way people sit when they have decided that stillness is their only remaining strategy. Fourth, Diana said. Miriam Foster. She presented the timeline: 2 visits, 2 denials, Gerald's compliance flags, the uncleared review, the death, the frozen estate. She noted that Miriam Foster's family had retained legal counsel and that their attorney had been in contact with Diana's office. Diana closed her briefcase and sat down. The room was quiet. Arthur Osgood looked at Nathan. Mr. Holloway. Nathan had not spoken since he sat down. He looked at Arthur for a moment, then at the general counsel, then for the first time directly across the length of the table at Gerald Marsh. I have one question, Nathan said. For anyone at this table who can answer it. What does the branch's compliance policy specify when a staff member modifies a client record following an incident that involves that client? Pause. Then Fitch said very quietly, fraudulent modification of a financial record. Thank you, Nathan said. He sat back. Gerald spoke then. His voice had the quality of something that had been very carefully controlled for an hour and was beginning to lose structure at the edges. Mr. Holloway, I want you to understand that everything I did was motivated by concern for the branches. Nathan looked at him. Not with anger, with the specific attention of someone who has decided that a thing needs to be said, and is going to say it completely. You wrote me 14 emails, Nathan said. In the third one, you said this branch values every person who walks through its door. I sent my mother to find out if that was true. She went without warning and without telling anyone her name. She arrived in simple clothes with entirely valid documentation and a check for $500,000 she intended to use to help kids in the county where she raised me. The recording shows what happened. He turned back to Arthur Osgood. I think you know what needs to happen. The vote was brief. Gerald Marsh was suspended from his position pending the outcome of the regulatory investigation. Shelley Pruitt was placed on administrative leave pending her cooperation. Fitch recommended to Gerald in a voice the rest of the room could still hear that he retain personal legal counsel before the end of the day. As Gerald gathered his papers, Nathan said one more thing. He said it quietly without raising his voice, and only Gerald was close enough to hear it clearly. You turned away 2 people at your door, Mr. Marsh. You still don't know what either of us could have given you. Gerald walked out without looking back. Arthur Osgood watched him go. From the window of the third-floor conference room, he could see the parking structure across the street. He watched Gerald's car pull out of the lower level and turn toward the highway. Then he picked up his phone and called the bank's communications director. The West Virginia Division of Financial Institutions opened its formal examination of First National Heritage Bank's Mill Creek branch 2 business days after the regulatory complaint was filed. The examination was assigned to a senior examiner who had spent 18 years in banking supervision and who read Diana's complaint packet on a Friday afternoon and called his supervisor before going home. By the following Monday, 2 examiners had seats in the Mill Creek branch's administrative office with access to the full transaction history and client file system. Gerald Marsh was placed on indefinite administrative leave with pay pending the outcome of the examination. His license to practice as a branch officer in West Virginia was under review. His attorney, a man he'd had to find over a weekend, advised him to say nothing publicly and to cooperate with the examination while exercising his right to legal counsel at every stage. Shelley Pruitt came in on the Monday that the examiners arrived. She sat down with them for 2 hours with her own attorney present and told them everything she knew about the fee overrides when she'd first noticed them. What Gerald had told her, they were for the one time she'd asked a follow-up question and been told the regional office had approved it. She had kept no personal records, but her memory of specific transactions was precise. Her cooperation was noted in the examination file. The terms of any resolution involving her would depend on the final findings. James Whitmore was named interim compliance officer for the branch effective the same week. Arthur Osgood called him personally to make the offer and told him his documentation had been essential to the process. James thanked him and said he understood. He did not say that he'd been keeping the notebook for 7 months, hoping someone would ask. He didn't need to. On the Tuesday of the following week, Arthur Osgood issued a public statement on behalf of First National Heritage Bank. It was 3 paragraphs. The first acknowledged that the bank had become aware of a serious service failure at our Mill Creek branch. The second stated that the bank had initiated immediate corrective action and was cooperating fully with the regulatory examination. The third paragraph was the one that mattered. We owe a formal and unreserved apology to Ruth Holloway, who visited our Mill Creek branch on October 7th with valid documentation and a legitimate account purpose, and who was treated in a manner that was entirely inconsistent with the standards and values this institution exists to uphold. Ms. Holloway's experience at our branch was unacceptable, and we are committed to ensuring it is never repeated. Ruth read the statement at the kitchen table. Carol had printed it out for her, which Ruth found slightly formal but appreciated in a way she didn't say. She set it down and called Nathan. I read it, she said. I know. I saw it before it went out. It's a nice apology, she said. Nathan heard something in her voice, not distance, but a particular kind of calm that was specific to his mother. Is that all? It's what they owed, Ruth said. You don't get extra credit for paying a debt, he smiled. No, you don't. Arthur Osgood wants to meet me. I know, he told me. Ruth was quiet for a moment. I'll see him. If he wants to say something to my face, I'll hear it. Good, Nathan said. There's one more thing. He paused. The Foundation's grant. The $12 million that Gerald was writing me about. I've been thinking about where it should go. Ruth waited. I'm establishing a new nonprofit in Mill Creek. It'll fund community healthcare services and educational scholarships for residents in the valley. Completely independent, no bank affiliation, no intermediary. It'll be run from an office on Carver Street. I'm calling it the Carver Street Foundation. Ruth said nothing for a moment. And the scholarship fund, Nathan said, will carry your name. The Ruth Holloway Scholarship. I know you'll say you're not dead. I'm not dead, Ruth said. I know. The scholarship isn't a memorial. It's recognition of a life that deserves to be named. He stopped. Then, the life you lived before I had anything to give back. That's what it's for. Ruth was quiet for long enough that he checked to make sure the call was still connected. Okay, she said finally. Her voice was the same as always. All right, there's one more thing, Nathan said. Arthur Osgood is going to meet you at the bank, the Mill Creek branch. In the lobby. In the lobby. You don't have to. Ruth thought about this. She thought about the revolving door, the cool air, the two men in dark suits being greeted, while she sat waiting with a cup of water no one had offered her. She thought about the bench outside afterward where she had sat very still while Carol filmed through the glass. No, she said. I want to. Nathan asked why. Because I have unfinished business there, Ruth said. I went to deposit a check. I intend to deposit it. Ruth parked the Buick in the same spot she had parked it 2 weeks earlier, across the street from First National Heritage Bank, in the second row of the public lot on Commerce Way. She sat in the car for a moment before getting out. The morning was clear and cold, the mountains sharp against the sky, the way they only got in late October, when the haze burned off and everything went precise. She checked her folder. The power of attorney was there, the new cashier's check, a replacement had been issued without difficulty from First Continental. Once the fraudulent presentation flag was formally cleared from the system and the transfer documentation for the scholarship endowment. Everything in order. Everything it had always been. Nathan was waiting on the sidewalk when she came around the car. He was in the same flannel shirt. She noticed this and didn't say anything about it. They crossed the street together. At the entrance to the Commerce Center, the revolving door was being held open by a man she didn't recognize, young in a bank blazer, who nodded at them both without speaking, which she found more respectful than anything effusive would have been. Arthur Osgood was standing inside the lobby near the reception desk. He was 64 years old, heavy-set, with the look of a man who had spent his career believing in institutional integrity, and who had recently had to look at that belief from an unfamiliar angle. He extended his hand when Ruth came through the door. She took it. Ms. Holloway, he said, I'm Arthur Osgood, Regional Director. I want to say to you directly what I said publicly, and I want to say it in the place where it happened. He looked at her steadily without the performance of apology, without working too hard at sincerity. He simply said it. What occurred in this lobby on October 7th was a failure of this institution. You were treated in a way that was wrong and that we cannot undo, but are committed to not repeating. I am sorry. Ruth listened. She looked at him the way she had looked at Gerald Marsh 2 weeks before, directly assessing accurately, without rushing to a conclusion. Thank you, she said. I accept that. She shook his hand again and let it go. At the far end of the teller row, James Whitmore was at his station. When Ruth glanced his way, he nodded. She nodded back. She did not know everything James had done, but she knew enough, and the nod contained all of that. Arthur Osgood stepped aside. Shelley Pruitt was not present. Her administrative leave was ongoing. The woman at the teller window was someone Ruth hadn't seen before, young, who welcomed her and took the folder and processed everything correctly and efficiently, and without a word about Ruth's jacket or her bag. The check was deposited. The transfer documentation was signed and filed. The scholarship endowment was formally established in the name of the Carver Street Foundation, with a note in the account record linking it to the Ruth Holloway Scholarship Fund. It took 11 minutes. Afterward, Nathan and Ruth walked 2 blocks up Main Street to Amos's diner and sat in the back booth by the window, the same booth where Nathan had been sitting when she called him. They ordered coffee. The cook came out to say hello to Nathan, whom he'd seen several times that week, and went back to the kitchen. They sat without talking for a minute. The diner was quiet mid-morning between the breakfast rush and lunch. Through the window, they could see the corner of Main and 3rd, and further up the block, the glass face of the Commerce Center. "I want to tell you something," Nathan said. He held his coffee cup in both hands. "When I was 16, the summer work program, the council meeting." Ruth looked at him. "I didn't tell you then, because I didn't want you to feel like anything more was on your plate. You were already working 2 shifts. He paused. "But Gerald Marsh was the one who turned down my application. He looked at me the whole time he said it. The same way he looked at you." Ruth held her cup. 27 years, she said. 27 years, Nathan said. She looked out the window. She thought about a 16-year-old boy in the valley below this town who had stood in front of a table and been told what he was worth, and had gone home without saying a word to his mother. She thought about what it had cost him to keep that quiet for so long, and what it had built in him in the keeping. "You should have told me," she said. "I should have," he said. "I know." She looked at him across the table. He looked the same as he always had, the same face she had known since before he had a face, essentially. Since before he was anything other than possibility. "You didn't do this for me," she said. It was not quite a question. "Not only for you," Nathan said. "There was a woman named Miriam Foster. She's gone now. Her family is still trying to settle what she left them because Gerald flagged her documentation and never cleared it." He turned his cup in his hands. She deserved someone to ask about her too. So did James Whitmore, 7 months keeping a notebook alone, waiting for a way to say what he knew. He looked at Ruth. "I did it for the next woman who walks in there in a Goodwill jacket, with a legitimate check, and a name nobody recognizes. She deserves better too." Ruth looked at her son for a long moment. "She does," she said. They finished their coffee. They talked about the foundation, the office on Carver Street, the first round of scholarship applications, the healthcare partnership Nathan was building with the county clinic. They talked about the marigolds in her window box, which were still holding on. They talked about nothing consequential, the way people talk when the consequential things have already been said. When they left, Ruth went to get her car. Nathan walked back toward the motel to meet Diana for the infrastructure project debrief, which had been postponed twice and was now overdue. Ruth drove home on familiar roads, past familiar landmarks, back to the house on Carver Street, where she had lived for 40 years and intended to keep living. She made a cup of tea. She sat at the kitchen table. The printed copy of Arthur Osgood's public statement was still there from when Carol had brought it over, and next to it now was the deposit receipt from the bank, everything processed, everything confirmed, everything complete. She set both aside. She looked out the window at the marigolds. still holding on. She picked up her tea and thought about nothing in particular, which is what contentment feels like from the inside. Not like an absence of difficulty, but like the particular quiet that comes after you have done what you were trying to do and done it correctly. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment and tell us what you thought. And if you believe that every person, regardless of what they're wearing, regardless of whose name they carry, deserves to be treated with dignity, share this with someone who needs to hear it today.